A Minnesota widow on an unexpected new mission, raising awareness for first responders who are self-medicating to cope. Her story of love, loss, and unbreakable faith is next. Annalee Tupy lost her husband, 31-year-old Montgomery police officer Bryan Tupy, 2 years ago. He was also a father to their baby boy, Desmond. Annalee, thank you so much for being willing to talk about all you've been through with the hope that it helps others. I know your story certainly has already, and our sympathy for your loss. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I heard you speak recently at a Heroes Helping Heroes event and then asked if you'd be willing to share it again here. But let's just start by talking about your late husband. I know really the love of your life. He had a love for service early on in life as well.
Yes, he definitely an authentic man in all of his hobbies, all the things that he has done. He started out as a marine biologist. So he actually went to UND and got his degree in fishery and wildlife biology, worked on the Bering Sea in Alaska for a few months on and off, and was the marine biologist on those fishing boats and had a really great time, really great experience doing so before coming back and being a full-time police officer.
Yeah, he came back to Minnesota, to his home state, and he was a firefighter, I know, as well. He kind of really did it all. What was it, though, about serving and protecting that drew him to the job?
He loved and felt very honored that in people's times of crisis that they were the ones that they called and that he could be there to help and support them through that. And he had a passion for law and order.
I know you didn't know it back then, but talk about there was a car accident I know that Bryan was involved with that would change the course of his life, of your life. And I know we have pictures of the car too. It's really miraculous that he even survived when you see the pictures.
Yeah, so I was actually living out in Colorado at the time. We were doing long distance. And because he was a fireman, one of the firemen contacted me that night saying, "Hey, if you haven't heard, give me a call." I called him, and at that time, everyone was still on scene. And they told me that they had to get the jaws of life out and that he was alive, but they weren't really sure what the injuries consisted of.
And he actually didn't have too many injuries, but he's also ultimately experiences a lot of pain, and he's put on medication because of that accident, right? On painkillers.
Yes. So he left. He walked away with that accident with a few days in the hospital. He did have his body was very bruised. He had a few staples in his head. The main injury that created the road, which changed a lot, was his foot. We called it the robo foot or the zombie foot because it was very badly damaged in that car accident and really decreased his range of motion. And as we know, the feet are just, especially as a cop, you're on your feet a lot. And so that created a lot of injury for him for the next few years.
And he ultimately is given a prescription for painkillers, and he's kind of using them off and on. But you talk about, years passing. They're good years. You're married. He's working. But also there's a lot of trauma that comes along with the job, that comes along with being a cop that perhaps many don't talk about, but it takes a toll.
Yes, the car accident happened in 2016, and we got engaged in 2016, married in 2018. It definitely created the trauma that police officers had seen. And of course, I had then expected him to come home and be a husband, be a father. And that just created a lot of the things that police officers see on a daily basis: heartache and abuse and PTSD. And the things that are seen and called to is just not something school can prepare a person for. He had a hard time with a lot of what he had seen and experienced.
And to cope with some of that, you discover that Bryan is numbing that pain from the accident, from what he's seeing kind of day in, day out, with his continued use of painkillers and alcohol. When was it for you that you realized that your husband needed help, and what did you do?
For me, it was about 13 months after we got married. We did not live together before marriage, which I don't want that to deter people. I strongly recommend. But of course, after you live with someone, you really discover a lot about them. And so, about 13 months after we had been married, I there were some habits in between there that I was kind of creating a red flag. And there was an event that at that kind of about that 13-month mark, I realized that this was not just drinking for fun, but there was trauma behind it. And it was a very unhealthy relationship with alcohol. At the time, I didn't quite know of the use of pain medication quite as extreme as it was. That was discovered kind of later on throughout it. But then for my husband, he discovered that it was more of an issue about 4 months after we had our son. So about January of 2021 is when he realized that this was more of a conflict that he really needed to get some help with.
And I know he's able to get some help, and you experienced some wonderful times with your young family at that time. But talk about that.
Bryan, especially as a police officer, Bryan never truly saw it as a problem because you kind of see the worst of the worst. So what you imagine to be someone that struggles with addiction or an unhealthy relationship with alcohol and pain medication, he didn't use it on a regular basis, meaning like he didn't use it daily, weekly, for sure monthly. And so we had a lot of great, we were always on the go. We did a lot of fun family road trips. And once he did come to terms that it was an issue and he got some help, he was completely sober for 6 weeks. And it was an incredible 6 weeks. He talked about it. He could tell that he was healthier. He felt better. His body was able to keep up more. It all really changed. And it was a really incredible 6 weeks that we had where alcohol and pain medication were not a problem. And we had a very fun family road trip as a family in there. We did a lot of fun things throughout our marriage, but especially those last 6 weeks were very incredible.
Then talk about what happens next. It's really something as simple as someone offering Bryan a drink at a party that breaks his sobriety.
Yeah, it was something as simple as a child's birthday party with some of our friends. And, because he hid so much of his pain and PTSD, and he didn't want to admit that this was a problem at all, none of his friends knew. No one knew that he had struggled with this. And so when we get together, of course, everyone's offering each other drinks. And Bryan said no at first. But of course, that kind of surprised the friends. So they were like, really? Tupy doesn't want a beer? Like, come on, they weren't pressuring. They were just surprised. So I don't want to say he caved, but he did. He had a beer. And a week and a half later is when he had passed away. It was just introducing that sip of alcohol again that that broke that sobriety and created a new cycle.
And when I heard you speak before, Annalee, you talk about this. You go to bed one night and you discover your husband, just 31 years old, in the garage. The next morning, he died of an accidental overdose. Not something he ever wanted to do, but take us back a couple years ago. Just that discovery and how you've been able to, even have this conversation here today. What has pulled you through?
That, early on in our marriage, we kind of decided, especially because many of the arguments stemmed from the drinking, we decided that it wasn't completely worth staying up and fighting. That's a very common, phrase, is don't go to bed angry. And we kind of decided it was okay to go to bed angry because then things were said that were hurtful. So we decided early on that we would go to bed and talk about it in the morning. And so that is what happened that Sunday night. He had a few drinks and created some arguments. He wanted to talk about it. And I had said, I'm done talking about it for tonight. We'll talk about it in the morning. And I know it was an accidental overdose. I know that he never intended this to happen. Not only not saying that as a naive wife or anything, but I do know how he would have taken his life, and this was not a part of it. I know he wanted to get help. He expressed it numerous times. He was actively seeking help through a variety of sources. And that night, he just took a few of his pain medication that he had on standby and mixed it with alcohol. And too much of the pain medication with the combination of the alcohol, and my husband wasn't in bed. So I started looking around. Our son was 8 months old and found him in our garage. A large part of how I'm able and why I want to talk about it now is my faith. Christ has really given me the strength to be able to talk about this and share our story to help encourage others in a variety of ways.
I know you've shown this picture before, Annalee, but it's your wedding day. And then, just fast forwarding a short time later to walking behind your husband's casket. Talk about your faith story and why this has been such an important part of all of this. The most important, really, but encouraging others to start a relationship with the Lord. It's what has helped you weather this storm.
Absolutely. I say it all the time. I don't know how people go through such an immense loss and just the trauma of finding him. I don't know how people get through it without a foundation in Christ. I was able, and I'm continuing to get through it because I know that God's plans are greater than my own. I know that Bryan is in heaven, and I miss him immensely, but it gives me such peace that he is in heaven and that there's no better place to be. That's all of our end goal. And so with this, I grew up Christian, but I didn't really have a relationship with Christ until about my sophomore year of college. And that has changed the course of my life immensely. And it's been about 11 years that I spend working on a relationship with God and reading his word and trusting him and praying. And I know it can sound very cliche, but I do, if I didn't have that foundation, this time of adversity and grief really would have taken me as well. It's a different level of mental and physical and emotional pain that I've never been able to experience and articulate. But having that foundation with Christ and that relationship has really, there's that verse, peace that surpasses all understanding. I knew it, I heard it many times, but once now going through this and after losing Bryan, it's hit me in a completely different way that I understand having Christ does that. He provides that peace and joy so that does surpass all understanding. I've never known that I could experience such conflicting emotions all in one time. I am so heartbroken and shattered, and I feel such heartache so much. And then at the same time, and anger, there's been a lot of anger that I don't necessarily like to admit, but with that piece as well. And it's been quite the journey figuring out how to live with both of them.
You've also said, Annalee, that you want to remind people that it is okay to accept help, that there is a community there waiting for you. And especially, I think your message is poignant to first responders, to police officers who think they, have to be big and tough on the outside, just like your husband.
Yes, he said all the time that people say this is what we sign up for. It's part of the job. He's okay. He's the man. He wants to put on this front. And I've really discovered that not only living through this, but also getting to know so many other first responders that have hardships, community is there. And I think it's important to be vulnerable so people, all of us can come alongside each other and walk with each other. That's what Christ has intended as far as community and love and walking alongside each other through our hardships. And talking about it is huge, of course, with a trusted community and keeping those feelings safe, but also knowing it's okay to seek help and that people are more than willing to and want to love on others and help others. But if they don't know that people are hurting, they don't know how to help. And there are so many out there that are hurting but don't want to talk about it because they're the man, or it's part of the job, or they just have to suck it up and move on. And so organizations like Heroes Helping Heroes, it's great that they can come alongside each other and talk about it, or just have that camaraderie that they can do fun things in a safe environment that with a group of people that understand.
How are you and Desmond doing today? I know you've received a lot of support, family, friends, your workplace, I know has been wonderful, but how are you guys doing?
It's definitely been a journey. I trust God's plan. It's been extremely difficult, and I continue to have good days and bad days. And it's learning to live with grief and this loss. They don't go away. People that have experienced close, immense loss, I'm sure can understand and relate that it doesn't go away. You just learn to live with the grief and navigate it, and you grow with it, and you continue to move forward. You can never move on, but you move forward. And Desmond's been a huge lifesaver for me. He keeps me going. He is a very busy 2.5-year-old now, and I'm thankful for him. And we're doing good. We have an incredible support between my work, my family, Bryan's family, all of our friends, both sides, my friends, his friends. So we've been very blessed with an incredible support, and especially my widow friends, my Wisters, we call them. They have also been incredible, just to see how you can grow and give encouragement with each other. So it's definitely a community that has helped us.
Yeah, I'm sure so many communities you wish that you were never a part of now, but thank you so much for speaking up to help other people. It is such an important message, and I know certainly your story has already helped many. So Annalee Tupy, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
And if you'd like to donate, there is a GoFundMe to help Annalee, now a single mom, raise her 2-year-old Desmond. You'll also find the link on our website. That will do it for this episode of Liz Collin Reports. We'll see you next time.